Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our workshop. My name is Matthew Boyd. I use he, they pronouns. I'm a student here at Washington University, and I have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. This is workshop number 25, the Cross Community Climate Collaborative, C4. This is a 1-hour workshop, so we will conclude at 11:30 a.m. If you are looking for a different workshop, now is your time to relocate. Before we begin, I want to walk through a few items both for the people in this room as well as our attendees joining virtually via Zoom on the Whova app. If you are joining us online, please keep your microphone off until ready to ask a question. I'll be monitoring the chat. There are a few ways to interact during this session on Whova. If you look to the left side of the screen, you'll see several tabs. These include Q&A, a chance to submit questions to the presenter, polls, where you may be asked to respond to questions from the speakers, chat, an open chat room tied into the Zoom chat where you can interact with the presenters and fellow attendees, and the community tab, which allows you to interact with the full audience of attendees at the summit. Also, a recording of this workshop will be made available in the next few days on the Whova app. All of the content from the summit will be available on the app for the next 3 months. Make sure you're entering a question or remark that you are in the proper area. I'll be monitoring the Q&A and chat sections of the app and help field questions for the speakers. With that, let me introduce today's presenters. We have Gary Kneen, the founder and executive director of 7 Generations Ahead, Mayor Katrina Thompson of Broadville, Illinois, Vicki Skaman, Mayor of Oak Park, and Darnell Johnson, the president of the Urban Efficiency Club. I will now hand it over to the speakers today.
Well, thank you. Welcome, everybody. By way of introduction, we're going to start off with a brief 3-minute video just to give you some sense of the project, and then we'll launch into a PowerPoint-less dialogue that we're going to have with our team members here. So, Jeremy, do you want to take it away?
Our project is called C4, Cross Community Climate Collaborative. The concept was birthed out of a relationship that I have with our village president in River Forest, Kathy Adusi, and Mayor Katrina Thompson of Broadview.
And the hope was if we as mayors take a leadership role in bringing other mayors together to address climate change, then I think we can actually find solutions, not only individually, but collectively here in our own region.
Sector meetings.
We meet as executive team every month with the partners that we have on our leadership board. And we are planning and strategically working with the other municipalities to keep them on task so that we meet all of our benchmarks, all of our goals and objectives, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's healthy homes to protect children with asthma, or EV charging stations. C4 has tapped into Darnell Johnson and Gary Kunin. They are our expert advisors on what direction we need to take for C4.
There really is a sense of urgency with this issue of climate, and also a huge issue around equity.
These communities that we're focusing on, they create a very diverse picture. We're looking at Black, brown, and white communities that have traditionally done things in silos, right? Not my problem, not my priority. Now we're at a place where they're understanding, no, it is our problem and it should be our priority.
Many of these communities have fewer resources. They don't have the staffing capacity to hire a sustainability coordinator or somebody to go after grants. So C4 is really intending to help support these communities at major projects.
So they want to do it's going to take time, but we have to be intentional with the messaging and how we educate so people know how important it is. Well, listen, I'm talking about it every single day.
We just don't want to miss I'm very excited and grateful to be receiving this award from the American Beverage Foundation for a Healthy America and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. This grant is going to allow us to engage more communities in working together to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Really great meeting, everybody. Send out the invitation.
We believe that this is a great start to hopefully what will be a very large impact to our communities.
All righty, I love that video. Thank you. So as you can tell, we have 4 of our 5 executive team members here, and what we're going to do is provide a little bit of context about the project, and then sort of conduct interview style some questions, and give our team members an opportunity to be able to articulate a lot of the detail about the content, you know, the things that we're actually working on, but also the process and some of the undergirding strategies, philosophies that we're operating from to implement this project. For those of you who were here yesterday, there were a couple sessions in the morning that focused on collaborative partnerships. And I am going to repeat a few data pieces from the Indiana University study that was presented about the fact that there are, first of all, a lot of federal funding out there right now, but most cities are not equipped to go after that funding, and that's just a reality. And not even talking about small towns and cities, but many cities are not. And so that's a real issue right now as we grapple with the millions and billions of dollars that the federal government is making available for climate, sustainability, and equity. 6 in 10 cities, the study quoted, do not have sustainability staff. In our case, with our 14 communities, it's even a lower percentage, right? We have 1. 1 in 4 communities don't have sustainability working groups, according to the study. 1 in 10 have a federal grant task force. None of our communities have that. So as Darnell mentioned in the video, we're bringing together Black, brown, and white communities to work collaboratively on climate, equity, and sustainability. And so with that, I want to kind of pitch to Darnell to set the table for us a bit. And Darnell, if you could talk a little bit about what the needs are that led to the development of C4 and what opportunities you see, and what are some of the undergirding philosophies that C4 is about?
Sure, Gary, thanks. And thank you to the Midwest Climate Collaborative, to everyone that's in this room. I think it takes all of us to be able to bring about the change that we want to see, both in our individual communities and collectively more broadly. One of the things I think that I want to start with, and as we begin to talk about C4, is understanding that in many regards, there is a disconnect between all of the work that we do and seeing it from a systemic place versus looking at it in silos. And much of the work that I see, and even conversations that I'm a part of, we talk about our individual work in a siloed way without really having an understanding of the work that we do has a more integrated and a collective impact. We would be much more successful if we understood that sustainability and climate and all of these different names and iterations that we use, it really should be looked at as a system. When we look at C4, we were looking at that because we understood, A, that we needed to take more of a systemic and collective approach if we wanted to see social mobilization and collective impact. Secondly, we understood that there was a huge disconnect among our municipal leaders and stakeholders in understanding that it's my community, and not understanding that communities that border them ultimately are impacted. They're all impacted by the things that are and are not happening within their local communities. The last thing is that we began to look at, and so with those things we understood and became very focused on what we call sustainability solidarity. And that is, how do we bring sustainability, climate, and all of these various iterations into a place where we're doing things in a manner that's designed to be collective and to share resources and to share information and to share our lived experiences to create a more sustainable future and region. One of the things that I will say is that, before I pitch it back to Gary, is that as we began to look at the needs that exist in all communities, but specifically in our most vulnerable communities, is the fact that there is a lack of resource. And I found that even in our more affluent communities, that there are resources, but they're still not being maximized, right? We're not maximizing the resources that we have because we're able to insulate ourselves from what we know as the obvious threats, but what we're not able to do is to prepare ourselves for the things that are invisible. And it's the things that we don't see that renders the greatest threat to us. And so in doing that, we've come to this place, and I've heard this term, we've been hearing this term around collaboration, and everyone is talking about collaboration, and I think that collaboration is good. However, I do not think that collaboration in and of itself is the answer to what we should be, how we should be moving forward. I'm actually moving in a direction of, not so much abandoning collaboration, but more so including the thought process of interdependency. We should be more interdependent on one another, and understanding that when we are dependent, then that means when we're interdependent, that simply says that we recognize that not only do we want to work together, but we need to work together. And when we collaborate, it's almost like I can be a part of a collaboration, but yet I have the question, out of all of the collaborations that are going on across the country, why are we not more collaborative? And that's because we have people that are part of collaborations that don't see themselves as being truly dependent or needing the service, the support, the learned and the lived experience of the other partners. So they join the collaborations, but yet they're not actively involved in those collaborations. And so we're really moving in the direction, C4, towards a place of what we call interdependency. That's not to make us, impotent in our own existence, but yet it's to amplify the need that we all really do need one another. Communities need one another. Practitioners and stakeholders and professionals, we need one another in a way that I think has been lost in transmission. And so C4 has been a mechanism by which we're bringing those conversations forward. Our mayors will talk about that more. But as designers, I think it's very important that we begin to design strategies that really emphasize the importance of us being more in a dependent state of one another versus us just strictly being collaborators.
Great, thank you, Darnell. So just to set some other basic information about the project, we're actually less than a year old. We have 14 communities that are engaged with us currently. They reside in the Chicago metropolitan area. All 14 are part of what is called the West Central Municipal Conference, which is a council of governments, one of many in the state of Illinois. Mayor Katrina Thompson of Broadview is the president of the West Central Municipal Conference. Our third mayor, who's not with us, Kathy Aducci, is the president of the Illinois Municipal League. And so our intentions with this project, as we build up our resources and continue to implement, is going to be to increase the number of communities across the metro area, across the state, and play this role of essentially three things: trying to provide existing resources, programs, and funding to these communities, and to make it easier for them to access those resources. Secondly, to actually do grant writing. And it was talked about a lot in a couple of the sessions yesterday, but to actually do grant writing and go after all of this federal money that's out there, and other sources as well. And then thirdly, we are actually in the business of creating and driving new projects across the topic areas, whether it's renewable energy, solar, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, workforce development, waste reduction, composting, green infrastructure, et cetera. And so with that, I want to now focus on our mayors. And our mayors, all three of them, have really been a tour de force. They have actually, without their work to enroll other mayors, this project simply wouldn't exist. And they really have done an extraordinary job. And I know that Darnell feels the same way that I do, that we're very grateful for the role that they have played to make this project a reality. So, mayors, I want to ask you this question. Why did you get involved in this? Why was this important to you from the beginning? And what would you say is unique about the C4 initiative? Mayor Thompson?
So thank you, Gary, for that, those accolades that you gave to my sister mayors. So my community is 8,000 residents. And when I first got elected in 2017, public safety was at the top. Environmental concerns was at the very bottom. But that shifted for me because I had a cousin that died of asthma at the age of 10 right after I got elected. And so I shifted from my obligations of 200 items and brought that all the way up to number 1. So I put that on the same platform as public safety. And if we're not having these conversations and we're not educating the communities that look like me, we're not educating them, guess what? We're going to continue to have these conversations, and it's going to continue to be silos in the Black and brown communities, and we can no longer work in that entity. I tapped into Darnell, and he's been like, we work hand in hand as it relates to the work that we're doing. And then with President Skaman and President Aducci, we just collaborated and it just worked. And when you look at the dynamics of the population of where we're a low to moderate income community, but we're looking at a medium to high income communities of what this looked like. And so working with Gary, Darnell, and the other mayors, with the MOU that we signed with the other 14 communities, it just made sense for us to start working together instead of in silos, because what happens in poor communities, it's work in silos. So we don't have access to the resources that we need to elevate. We also want to tap into our early childhood and K through 12 systems, because they need to be educated and informed, because one thing that we know for sure and for certain is that children go home and they speak to their parents. Children are the ones that change the narrative of the outcomes that we're looking for. So C4 is about doing the work unapologetically, and also doing the work to educate, inform, and be inclusive and not exclusive to anybody. This is about humanity, the environment. We have to do better, and we have to teach our children to do better, to grasp the concept of what it is, even if it's baby steps. I mean, it's just as simple as when they first initiated safety seatbelts. We have to think forward thinking like that, put it on a platform where it's going to stick. And so it takes all of us to do the work, and we have to be intentional, but we can't just look at funding, we have to look at the outcomes. And so I'm focusing on the outcomes, on the deliverables that we have as it relates to this collaboration. So thank you, Gary.
Great, thank you. So President Skaman, you're relatively new in the role as president, though I know in your first few years, you're, I'm sure, feeling like you've been at this for 100 years in terms of everything that's been thrown at you. But why C4? Why is this important to you? Why is this important to the Village of Oak Park?
Yeah, thank you, Gary, and thank you for having us today. This is a wonderful opportunity to share our story. So my leadership is largely about breaking down silos. So the Village of Oak Park is the first community west of the city of Chicago. We share Austin Boulevard with the west side. And of the 40-something communities that is with the West Central Municipal Conference, we're not the largest, but we're one of the largest at 55,000 residents. And we're notably progressive. We've been at climate change for at least a decade. But here we are, a community with 7 generations ahead in our community, where their home base is here, and they've been working regionally for a while. And the partnership between the village and 7 generations ahead has been challenged. We have significant silos in thinking that we have the answers, and notably in our community. And silos even between our own governmental partners in our community, between our park district and our township. So by the way, if you don't know, Illinois has more governmental bodies than like any other state in the nation. And you know, I think that does unfortunately breed some of these silos as well. And so as a progressive community, we've had a bit of a reputation of communicating with neighboring communities, again, as if we've got it all figured out. And that's not worked in our favor. So it was a big reason for why I ran for village president. So I was that school teacher route to elected office, school teacher, nonprofit, coalition work. And that coalition work was a grant to reduce underage drinking in our community with a grant from the Illinois Department of Human Services. And so in that process, I really embraced, you know, inviting our partners in to be making the decisions from the ground up, and meeting people where they're at, and learning from what they can bring to the table. And so that is, you know, what C4 is about, and that's what my leadership as village president is about. So we have invested significant dollars and continue to invest significant dollars in climate change, but, you know, my feeling is that, you know, if we're not going to connect with neighboring communities and work together and share resources, then we might as well be sending our money to Africa, which we should be doing anyway. And so this is, and also as a new mayor, so I was just elected in 2021. The network, the support system that I have, it's no mistake that we're 3 women. and women do know how to get things done. Sorry, gentlemen. And so, but also using the relationships that we all have to do our recruitment and with our neighboring communities, again, meeting them where they're at.
All righty. So C4 is not a council of government. We're connected to councils of government, in particular the West Central Municipal Conference. We are really a collaboration among 2 consultancies, the Urban Efficiency Group, 7 Generations Ahead, and our mayoral leadership. And as I mentioned earlier, our mayors went out and enrolled, to this point, other mayors to participate, a total of 14 that signed an MOU to be a part of the C4 initiative. Mayor Thompson, you did a lot of the heavy lifting along with your 2 mayoral colleagues. Can you tell us about that process and how you were able to get some of these other mayors on board?
So I would like to say that I believe in working in transparency and honesty and trust. And so people have to trust you when it's something new. And when we were in a pandemic, I started bike riding because we was indoors. And communities from the 14 that participated, their residents was coming to Broadview to ride bike with me. And so that was significant to me, that we can get other residents from other areas to come to where I am to ride with me and my constituents. And so when we started talking about this collaboration, it was simple, just pick up the phone. And so I just picked up the phone and I called the mayors and said, you all need to be a part of this, and this is why. And we shared the MOU with them. The MOU made sense to them. We did a big press release at Triton College where we had other elected officials that came out to witness what we were doing, because this was something new for our local region, that 14 mayors could get together and collaborate and do the work. And so now we're about maybe 8 or 9 months in, and now we've created roadmaps, and I think Darnell probably can speak a little bit more to that, but we've created roadmaps so that we can reach the benchmarks so that we can have the deliverable outcomes that we're seeking. And so it was just that simple, and working with Vicki and Kathy on this, and we having conversation about how we recruit, and they had a bundle of mayors they had to reach out to, and this is where we are. So it's really just picking up the phone and being intentional about the conversation, being intentional about the work, and being intentional about accountability to your own constituents, because everyone has a right to the environment. And it's our obligation as elected officials to spearhead that message so that it resonates with our residents, with our partnerships, with our collaborative partnerships, and with our communities on what that look like. Like Vicki said, you know, we are the only state in the union that have all these different taxing bodies. And so we just started talking to our park districts, we started talking to our libraries, our local schools, and they all are part of it. They got on board because it makes sense.
Respecting, though, also that some of them were ahead of us, right? Mm-hmm. And some of them are just starting. And so that, you know, it's just important to reflect on in building trust, so that our neighboring communities, you know, want to get involved, and then delivering on the resources. Oak Park is known as this resource-rich community, but you kind of have to know somebody to gain access, and so C4 also really it is taught for the village of Oak Park how to intentionally be moving forward, centering race equity and environmental justice. And that's speaking to the relationships that Darnell was talking about earlier, where the Village of Oak Park needs the partnerships that we're developing with C4 to really have the collective impact that we're seeking.
Alrighty. So we're going to now move into a little bit of the content, sort of what are we doing on a day-to-day basis to drive the project. And one of the big bucket areas is that we're actually connecting communities through our meeting structures. And let me kind of get into that to set the table a little bit. Currently, we have all of our communities meeting on a monthly basis via Zoom, and these 1.5-hour meetings are chock full of, again, resources, programs, new ideas, discussions on projects, et cetera. We've been fortunate to partner with our county government, Cook County, that has a lot of money through the through ARPA. And that money right now is supporting programs including EV charging stations for environmental justice communities, the CPACE program, which is providing financing for institutions for energy efficiency upgrades, a Grow Solar initiative, which really is a group buy program for residents in our communities to be able to get reduced rates on the purchase of solar panels for their homes, a brownfield program that they are doing that goes in and actually assesses what the needs are and then provides some funding for strategy implementation to remedy whatever the brownfield issue is. And also a climate resiliency planning initiative. I believe it's about $16 million that the county has. And so we're working right now to connect our C4 communities to all of those resources through our monthly meetings, but also through standalone meetings around the specific programs. We're also beginning to create sector-based meetings where we will convene all of the park districts a couple of times a year, all of the K through 12s a couple of times a year, all of the mayors a couple of times a year to be able to work on these strategies as well. But as I mentioned earlier, another thing that we're doing is actually driving projects that either we're creating on our own or partnering with other organizations to create. And Darnell, Darnell's organization has a lot of areas of expertise, but workforce development is a strong area that you're working in, obviously energy efficiency. Can you talk a little bit about the workforce development work and then also talk about your role in developing sustainability working groups within each of the communities?
Sure. So I think I'll start with the development of the working groups, and then we'll slide into the workforce development projects. I think that one of the things that we've learned and we've become very clear on is that while there are communities that are very different stages of implementation and development of sustainability plans, what we've come to find out is that there are many communities that are doing a lot of work but have not found a way to easily and seamlessly, comprehensively report that work, to measure the impact of that work, and even to be able to have it in a way where community residents can easily access it to understand what it is that their communities are actually doing within the sustainability space. I think it's very important that I also mention that many of the terms that we use as practitioners and stakeholders that's very commonplace for us that we understand, such as go green and sustainability and environmentally friendly, it makes perfect sense to us, but that doesn't always translate to the everyday end user because it's more of platitudes. And so it's important for us to begin to demystify the space to a certain degree to where people can truly get their arms around it. And I mean, from the youngest to the oldest citizen in our community should understand what climate and sustainability and the direct impact on them and their family, what that means. And so when we began with the working groups, our working groups, we work with each individual municipality. We first start with developing a sustainability team or a commission if there's not already one in place. If there is one in place, we work with them to either enhance what they already have or to activate those teams again. Because many times most of us know, we'll start teams and then a period of time will go by and we kind of like, they become defunct for a little bit. And then we have to go in and reactivate and reinvigorate those teams so that they're active again. Once we develop the teams, the next thing is to really start talking about their roadmap and what are the low-hanging fruits, the projects that they want to see, that they want to engage in the immediacy, midterm, and long term. I think it's very also important that we understand that as coming into a community, it's not our job to tell them what they should be doing. It's our job to hear from them, learn from them, and then guide them in the direction that would ultimately lend them the best outcome, right? One of the things that I'm a proponent against, and that is to go into someone else's community and just because I may have an understanding about sustainability, feel like I understand and know the culture of that community. That is a huge misstep. It turns people off. It causes it to be a very difficult environment to work in. It does not lend itself well to the adoption of best practices and technologies. And so we definitely stay away from that. We want to hear what the community wants to do, their goals, their aspirations, and then we begin to develop a plan based upon the information that we have gathered from them and to show them where the resources are. Gary mentioned that earlier, being able to coalesce and to galvanize resources and make it easy for them to access those resources. To have resources and they have to jump through 50 different hoops to get to them is counterproductive. And we see that many times, especially in vulnerable populations. And so when we develop these roadmaps and we began to assist these communities in moving in the direction that they've identified, we began to see slow adoption, in some cases very expedient adoption, and they began to feel empowered to do this work on an ongoing basis. They feel empowered to share the work that's going on with their neighbors, and they began to have, discussion tables around it. That leads to the birth of new idealisms and innovation. And with that being said, that's happened with us around the green landscape technology. We've now discovered that many communities are moving away from gas-powered lawn equipment and landscaping equipment to electric. Well, within that conversation, there are very nuances that we have to be concerned and considerate of, and that is the displacement of the small firms that are using gas-powered equipment that may not have the resources to go out and resource the electric equipment, right? So as we're talking to municipalities and they're adopting these ordinances, we encourage them to say, in the adoption of new ordinances, are we considering and implementing a timetable that allows for them to be able to resource and to gather the infrastructure that they need as a small business to be able to continue to do business in that community? If not, we run the risk of economic displacement of those individual firms, and now and many of them are Black and Hispanic firms that are now displaced, that can't continue to do work that ultimately takes care of their family and also provide jobs for others. So through these different, direct engagements with the communities, we're learning what they have aspirations to do. And then if we see things that could have the tone of something that's predatory, we flag it for them for their consideration, and we identify those concerns and allow them to reconvene with their teams internally to discuss that. The last thing that we want to do as we move to a cleaner economy is to do so in a manner that is harmful to people that have been a part of our communities in some way, whether it's a small business. Many times those small business owners are also residents of those communities, and we don't want to disrupt in a negative way. And so that's where we are with the individual working groups. As we begin to talk about our workforce development opportunities, we have to understand that when we talk about sustainability, climate, that also lends itself well to economic opportunities. Economic opportunities in the way of emerging markets such as energy efficiency, electric vehicle and electric vehicle charging stations. And if we are not capitalizing and being able to embrace those economic opportunities in a way that we can ensure, A, that is inclusive and it is diverse, then we're doing a disservice to the overall environment. We're greenwashing, and that's something that we want to stay away from. So what we've done within our workforce development efforts is we are working with our mayors and our individual municipal partners to identify that these localized training opportunities are made available. We have worked with the Chicago Urban League to secure resources to be able to extend training and national certification opportunities for in the energy efficiency sector, and getting folks to understand that energy efficiency is a career path. It is not just a job. When we start talking about the built environment and everything that's associated with energy efficiency, it creates living wage jobs. When you begin to look at, and I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole on this, but when we begin to look at the growth trajectory of energy efficiency, even during the pandemic, it showed consistent growth year over year. But yet it's also the least diverse space when we began to talk about cultural diversity and inclusion. How do we begin to close that gap? Well, we have to, first of all, provide localized training opportunities. I always call it the 3 A's. It's awareness, it's access, and it's affordability. If folks are not aware that these training opportunities are available, if they don't have access to get to them because of different types of barriers around transportation, and if it's not affordable for them, then we will continue to see an industry that is growing continue to lack diversity and inclusion. And we have to be intentional in our efforts to say, how do we bring resources to their local community and get them into these different training programs and opportunities? The second part of that, and the last part I'll end on, is that it's not enough to train them. We also have to find the firms that are looking to hire so that once they're trained, that training certification leads to employment. If not, we do a huge disservice and we set them back probably years, because people are excited about getting trained, but then if I don't get a job at the end of the training, I still am in no better position to provide for my family at the end of the day. We have to look at things end to end. It drives me insane when I hear workforce development conversations happening and we don't have a means by which we can connect training to employment. We have to be more intentional about making sure that we're getting people that have these certifications into jobs, into career paths, so that they can take care of their families, they can become homeowners, they can become a part of a functioning society and be a contributor, and not looked at and made to feel like they're always looking for a handout. So when our workforce development efforts are really intentional in those regards.
Great, thank you, Darnell. Mayors, I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes to talk about maybe one project that's going on in your community that you're particularly interested in and working on. Part of the idea with C4, in addition to establishing these working groups and figuring out what the individual communities want to work on, is that we do have some things that are tried and true, and that we're going to try to promote to many of the communities. Darnell mentioned the policy initiative related to green landscaping. In Illinois, our state government just passed legislation that would allow individual municipalities to develop energy efficiency stretch codes, kind of going beyond what the standard is. And so we're going to be working with communities to help them to adopt stretch codes for their individual municipalities. There's also work in individual institutions to develop sustainability plans within K through 12s, within park districts, within libraries, so that there's an actually stated policy that says that we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is recommending, and also build in equity measures and other sustainability goal targets that each of these institutions can then be working off of. We're doing a lot of work in solar right now. We're fortunate to be in a state that has passed really, really significant legislation around renewable energy, energy efficiency, and a large part of that is solar. So one of the projects that we're doing is, or one of the state's projects is called the Illinois Solar for All program, that actually provides reduced rate electricity for low to moderate income residents and guarantees that jobs will be created for low to moderate income residents as a part of those new projects that are being installed. So we're going to be connecting about 1,500 residents to start with 3 new projects that are being built in Illinois. And those projects are going to, again, provide 25% reduced rate on electric costs for low to moderate income residents. We're also working with developers to create new projects. We've got developers that have accessed land. One in particular has 100 acres of land that they're pursuing that's going to provide opportunities for our institutions within C4 to be able to buy renewable energy through power purchase agreements, through contracts from newly built projects in Illinois. And we're going to support institutions. So Mayor Thompson, you started an initiative and with Darnell around solar industrial corridor. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So the Village of Broadview is a balanced community. We're a third residential, a third commercial, and a third industrial. And when we first started the work, we started with our industrial stakeholders because they have the biggest square footage as it relates to warehousing and manufacturing that they have. And we have a collective group of business owners that have invested to get to solar paneling within this industrial corridor. So that was our first start to go after them because they have the financial resources a lot of times to do something good within the Village of Broadview. The industrial corridor, they have their own sector, a group of team that they work with. So these CEOs or whoever they design to designate to do the work, they have these meetings on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis to talk about how they get resources, how we, the Village, can help them get to the goal that they need. So, for instance, we have one that needed a new roof. And then on an industrial building, a roof could be millions of dollars. And so how do they look to get that financial $1 million so that they can put solar paneling in place? They've done the work. They are doing it. So our Local 63 is the first to do that. They have started with our Union Local 63, has started putting solar panels on their industrial building, on top of putting the conduit in place for EV charging stations. And so that will allow our residents or the people that work within the Village, if they drive in electric vehicles, they have access and resource to that EV charging station. So the corridor is we don't work in silos. We work as a team in the Village of Broadview. So that's with all of our business stakeholders and input from our residents on things that we like to see as it relates to the Village at large, because we all pay taxes there, and it all matters to all of us. So it's an investment to the Village of Broadview.
Thank you. And President Skaman.
Well, so I mentioned I'm a teacher, and I was a teacher, and you really can never take that out of a person. So working with our young people is going to be something that I personally am looking forward to. But again, that's those silos. So, we're only 4.5 square miles with 55,000 people. So we're incredibly dense and we're landlocked. We don't have a warehouse district at all. In fact, we don't have a lot of big box stores. We're a community with 12 small business districts in 4.5 square miles. So we are a community of small business. We're accredited with being one of the most diverse communities in our country, and that we are very integrated, both racially and socioeconomically. But we do lack, we benefit from the west side of Chicago because not everybody feels like their community is in our community. And some of that and the resource rich, I think, are some of the symptoms that I said earlier that we have a lot of silos. We've been working, so we've had an Environment and Energy Commission for at least 2 decades. When Darnell was talking earlier about it, times when, or communities that may have one, but it's not necessarily working the way that it should, we would fall into that category. But my predecessor was very much about development and not so much about environment and energy. So that commission went by the wayside with his leadership. And then what that did is it brought a groundswell of advocacy groups. We have over 100 non-for-profits in Oak Park, and we have over 30 groups with the word equity in it. So there is a lot of privilege in this idea that we have it all figured out, in groups that want to maintain their territory or over their mission. And I think in order for us to be really effective and be the leader that I know that we can be, you know, my leadership is going to be about bringing those groups, even in our community, our own community, together to work together. And listening to Darnell and Gary speak and Katrina, you know, without this team, I don't know that I'd be able to accomplish that. You know, so we've considered ourselves a community that centers DEI, but we really weren't. One of my first phone calls to Darnell was, you know, Darnell, I've got this RFP that's on the agenda for tonight, and all I see are barriers to Black and brown firms. And he's like, yes, ma'am, you're right. Yes, Mayor, you're right, you're right. So we need to, and you know, really be diligent about changing how we do things. And you know, without these partnerships, I don't know that I'd be being, you know, but now I know that we'll be successful in building those partnerships in a culturally competent way, where we're constantly learning. So that's what my leadership is about, and that's what I'm going to be excited about. I'm lucky in that I've got staff that can champion, yes, we're going to do a stretch code. Yes, we're going to do electrification for all new buildings. Yes, we're going to, you know, work towards the retrofitting, although I'm going to need help in figuring out how it is that we bring in those sectors of our community that are not historically part of the dialogue so that everybody has access. Green lawn contracts have been an ongoing dialogue in Oak Park too, but we need to do that in a very equitable way, and that takes being thoughtful and patient. And so, you know, we have staff that can do that, but there's us as well, the opportunities for grants. There's a dual relationship through C4 for us and our surrounding communities.
Alrighty, so we have about 3 minutes or so before we open it up to questions. I'm going to mention one other project, and then Darnell, anything else that you want to pick up, and mayors as well. One of the recent wins was that we were able to receive a grant from the USDA in their waste reduction and composting program to work with the communities of Broadview, Bellwood, and Maywood, all considered to be environmental justice communities, to actually establish residential curbside food scrap collection programs for the residents within those communities, but also to work in the K through 12s to implement a zero waste schools program that would also incorporate food scrap diversion and hauling to compost sites. And so that's a really exciting project. We're going to be building on that project and sourcing some additional funding from our county government to support their waste reduction goals. And so we're really excited to be working in that arena as well. Darnell, what are we missing here? What else do you want to wrap up with?
I think that my last thing would be as a wrap up is around this conversation about centering equity in this conversation about climate and sustainability. I think that we hear it often, and Mayor Skamey just mentioned it. One of the things that I had the pleasure when I first started working with Mayor Thompson was that we wanted to make sure that the real issues that were confronting our most vulnerable populations were being brought to the forefront in a way that they could not only be heard, but that solutions could be created that would address them in a meaningful way and in a transformative way. And oftentimes what we're seeing now, and Gary mentioned it earlier, is that many of these grants are looking at environmental justice communities, Justice 40, and so we're seeing now this additional inquiry around partnering with communities that have traditionally not been partnered with. When we talk about C4, and I'm speaking now, when we talk about sustainability and climate, it's not just about the planet. It's also about the people. And I think that we have to make sure that in our work, that as we center equity, we are centering people. I've seen and I've heard, and I don't want to get in trouble or want to shake, rub anyone the wrong way, but I've seen people be more concerned about sea turtles than I've seen them be concerned about human beings. Mm-hmm. And to me, somewhere along the line, that just seems to be fundamentally misaligned. We have to begin to get back to the business of caring about people, all people. And when we talk about centering equity in our work and being interdependent, then that means that we're depending on one another because it takes all of us to make a better existence for all people and for all living beings and organisms that inhabit this planet, right? And so when I was working with Mayor Thompson, that was one of our biggest things, and I'm honored to work with both of these mayors and Mayor Ducey, who's not with us today. But that will be my lasting thought, is that as we continue to talk about how do we get through these very complex conversations, very nuanced conversations, are we making sure that we as individual thought leaders and practitioners are truly centering the things that matter, so that as we move on, because inevitably we're not going to always be in the situations and the positions that we're in, and after we move from these positions and the roles that we're playing, have we left the positions in a state that the folks that are coming behind us can have a foundation that is equity-centered, that is people-centered, that they can continue to build upon? And so if the answer to that question is no, then I think that we need to relook at the strategies and relook at the systems that we are supporting and begin to deconstruct those things that are inequitable and replace them with things that are going to promote humanity at the end of the day. So that would be what I would leave with.
Gary, can I just add one thing? I just want to go back to the MOU that we started with when we launched less than a year ago, with 14 communities signing on to prioritize climate change in their budgets. I was first drawn to Mayor Thompson because she had already done that. She already had that prioritized. So that's what we're asking first of each one of the communities that we're reaching out to, is will you prioritize climate change? And the guidebook that Darnell and the grant searching that Gary does, that gives us that roadmap to success, no matter where you're starting from.
All right, and can you end us?
Sure. So for me, it's simple. It's all about humanity and how we care and love on each other, regardless of where you come from. If we lead by example and we just do the work and we're intentional about the work that we do, we can see real change. C4 is about benchmarks, goals, objectives, and outcomes. And then reporting back to our stakeholders on the work that we've done over the course of 1 year. So not trying to do it all at one time, but just taking a little bit at a time to show results. I'm all about being result-driven, because that's when the true story, that's when we start telling a true story of the work that we're doing in this space called climate, and how we collaborate with each other and not work in silos. We have to be inclusive. We can't be exclusive any longer. It's time out for that. We have to move the needle forward. And with C4, I believe in the state of Illinois that we are moving the needle forward with the 14 communities that signed the MOU.
Great. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you so much for your presentation. That was really helpful. I heard you mention multiple times the concept of low-hanging fruit in terms of policies that communities can adopt, even if you have low staff capacity. I understand not every community can do things like regulate gas-powered leaf blowers, and I really appreciate that you called out that there are some issues with that in terms of equity. So just from your experience, what are some examples of that low-hanging fruit in terms of big impact, but not as much energy needed in terms of staffing, funding, et cetera?
So for me, it's like I said earlier, I look at this from the lens of the priority. And for me, it was on the low scale. But when you look at public safety and we look at gun violence and indiscretionable things that take place within communities, it shifted for me. And so I'm able to speak on that because it shifted for me because I have a personal story that resonates, that it makes no sense that I have a cousin that died of asthma at the age of 10 when there's so many other resources, but because of the community that she lived in, didn't have the resources to educate the parents to get her the medical treatment that she needed, she lost her life. So it shifted from me. So making environmental on a low scale, I raised that up to a priority for the Village of Broadview. And I'm fortunate enough that the residents in the Village of Broadview, they trust me. They trust that I'm going to lead with transparency, being accountable, and being responsible. So it starts with leadership.
You know, just to throw a few quick ones out, where, you know, one of our communities has a single-use plastic ordinance that would require businesses to only give out single-use plastics if they're being requested by the customer, not to make that a habit. There's a plastic bag ordinance, benchmarking ordinances that we're hoping to replicate around energy efficiency and reduced emissions. Those are a few of the things that were on our radar screen. But as we do our working groups, we know that other policy, low-hanging fruit are gonna arise, and we'll be working with those communities to help enact those policies.
One of the first ones for Oak Park was a straw, having to request a straw when in a restaurant or in your to-go food. But something that I did learn as as our mayor that I didn't know prior was the benefits that we have in being a home rule community for creating even a sustainability fund. So we do have a bag ordinance where if you, at the grocery store, use a plastic bag, you're charged 10 cents for each plastic bag, which was to incentivize bringing reusable bags. And then that 10 cents goes to or 5 cents stays with the store, and 5 cents goes to the village for a sustainability fund. That's not something that you can do if you're not a home rule community, which in the state of Illinois is for communities that are over 30,000 people, or is it 30 or 35?
25.
25, okay, 25,000. And we're surrounded by a number of communities that are less than 25,000. And so then that's just one example of something that was happening in Oak Park that the option didn't even exist elsewhere.
So can I add to that, just so you all understand the difference in the dynamics in the state of Illinois when we talk about home rule versus non-home rule communities? So my population is 8,000, so we're considered a non-home rule community. The only way that we can get leverage at the state level is we would have to pass a referendum to change our status. And so that's the difference in that. And so we do, within C4, we do have some communities that have passed the referendum to have the home rule status so that they can make local decisions for their municipality.
It's difficult to do, though, because the minute you say something that means that your government can raise your taxes without taking that to referendum, then that typically is enough to, for a vote no. So even if something is in their best interest.
Another question, was there?
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm with the Morton Arboretum, which is located in the western suburbs, and I'm curious about the role of cultural institutions thus far in the C4 program, or maybe what you might be hoping in the future, how they can contribute to your initiatives.
Well, maybe we can mention Greentown.
Go ahead.
So it would be shortly after our 1-year anniversary. We're working on pulling together our own one-day seminar at Triton College, which was intentional too, because a big part of our mission is training our young people as the future bearers or caretakers of our earth, right? And so we're looking for sponsorships and for groups that want to present on that day. Now, the Village of Oak Park was the first Illinois Arboretum, or municipal arboretum in the state of Illinois. I think Riverside was number 2. And so we would definitely welcome partnership for education to our municipalities. Those monthly meetings, I have been participating and listening and learning, and they've been amazing. The collaborative efforts, the questions that come from municipalities that are, and just the eagerness now in the relationship building, the networking that we're building, that very supportive atmosphere for true getting work done.
And to build on that, we're always looking for partnerships, right? We have the resources that we have. We rely on the technical expertise of other organizations to be able to support initiatives that are going to benefit the C4 communities.
So June 22nd, Greentown. I think you can just search that on the web.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm with a local municipality here on our Sustainability Commission, and we've started a sort of a coalition, I guess, a consortium of other local communities similar to this. It's very loose right now. We're still kind of getting off the ground, but one of the things that I was really interested in, the idea of leveraging was the, accessing the funding, helping that process, like helping each other through that process, but also I was wondering if you guys have started down that path, had any experience with that yet, and in particular, whether combining those efforts, maybe doing joint applications, if you feel like that would help, help your case in getting additional funding, accessing additional funding, rather than everyone applying, separately in those silos.
Well, let me take that. I think that that's a very great question, and the reason why I say that is because when we began to look at the power of us working together in a synergized fashion and how that is demonstrated and it presents when you're going after funding, it makes the application much more powerful when you are able to bring multiple municipalities together that have all coalesced and understand that their role within that larger plan. It strengthens the application, number one. The video that you saw earlier when we first started is exactly what you're talking about. It was because Oak Park took the lead, working with Broadview and River Forest and then with C4, but they leveraged that because Mayor Skaveman was able to qualify based upon the size of her community to even be considered for the U.S. Conference of Mayors grant. And I think that when you ask that question, it is absolutely unequivocally better to be able to bring like-minded municipalities and groups together to go after a larger scale funding, and as much as those groups are able to understand their individualized role within the budget, right? That'll probably be the biggest thing, is so that there is clear roles and responsibilities within development of that strategy. So should you be awarded, there's no ambiguity around what goes to who and who's doing what. But I mean, the strength that it brings when you're working together is uncompromised, for sure.
I know we didn't get all the questions answered or asked, but if we're willing to stay afterwards if people have other questions that they'd like to ask.
Yeah, I just want to say our last group stayed after for questions, so if you guys do want to stay after and talk to our panelists, if they're okay with it, I'm sure it'll be all right. And I just want to go through a few of our closing notes real quick before we leave. I want to say thank you again to our speakers, everybody here today, and everyone joining remotely. And again, a recording of this workshop will be made available for the next few days on the Whova app. These recordings will be available in the app for the next 3 months or so. And our closing panel begins at 11:45 in the Emerson Auditorium. That's right here. You guys don't even have to get up. It's great. Thank you again for coming.